If you believe that having enough money will guarantee you can buy whatever you want at the grocery store as this year wraps up, that assumption is likely wrong. Shortages don't show up with dramatic warnings or empty cities like something out of a disaster film. Instead, they creep in slowly and almost unnoticed. Shelves look a little barer, packages get smaller, and familiar brands quietly vanish without explanation. In this video, I'm going to break down 15 everyday grocery items that face a real risk of becoming extremely hard, or even impossible, to find before the end of January 2026. This isn't speculation or internet gossip. Every item discussed is backed by concrete data tied to production slowdowns, climate impacts, labor shortages, and ongoing disruptions across global supply chains. Food isn't disappearing because shoppers are overbuying. It's disappearing because the systems responsible for growing, processing, and transporting it are under intense and sustained pressure. Products like olive oil, cocoa, and coffee, along with many household staples, are all being affected at the same time by extreme weather events, workforce shortages, export limits, and breakdowns in transportation. When even one part of this chain fails, the strain quickly spreads everywhere else. This video is not intended to spark fear or encourage panic buying, and it's certainly not about hoarding. The purpose is to help you recognize genuine risks, understand which foods are facing the most pressure, identify what remains relatively stable, and make small, sensible preparations that fit normal family life, especially for viewers over the age of 50. 15. Arabica coffee and specialty blends. For many people, especially older adults, coffee is more than a source of caffeine. It's a dependable morning habit, something familiar that signals the start of the day and brings a sense of comfort and normalcy. But the very coffees most people prefer, particularly Arabica and specialty-grade varieties, are also the first to suffer when weather patterns become unpredictable. Arabica coffee is highly sensitive to environmental changes. Even modest increases in temperature or rainfall arriving at the wrong time can drastically affect both yield and flavor. In recent years, major producers like Brazil and Colombia have been hit repeatedly by cycles of drought, extreme heat, and then unusually heavy rains. These conditions don't just reduce how much coffee is grown, they make it far harder to produce beans that meet the strict standards required for specialty-grade coffee. As a result, the coffees people recognize and trust tend to disappear quietly from store shelves. They're often replaced with lower-cost blends that rely on cheaper beans and sacrifice consistency for affordability. When supplies tighten, the market predictably removes single-origin coffees, medium roasts, and flavor-stable varieties first, the very options longtime coffee drinkers are most loyal to. What usually remains are mass-market alternatives. Darker roasts with a harsher profile, designed to mask lower-quality beans and keep prices competitive. As the year progresses, rising global demand combined with higher transportation and fuel costs causes Arabica and specialty coffee prices to climb faster than general inflation. For older adults, this isn't only a financial issue. It's the quiet frustration of losing a daily ritual that's been part of life for decades. And when something as simple and familiar as a morning cup of coffee becomes harder to find or afford, it signals that the strain on the food supply system runs much deeper than what's visible in the grocery aisle. 14. Extra virgin olive oil. Few foods reveal just how delicate the global food system has become as clearly as extra virgin olive oil. This isn't a matter of opinion or perception. It's supported by hard production data. In an incredibly short span of time, worldwide olive oil output has dropped sharply. Global production fell from roughly 3.4 million tons in 2021 to 2022 to about 2.6 million tons in 2022 to 2023, and then declined again to approximately 2.4 million tons in the 2023 to 2024 season. In other words, more than 1 million tons of olive oil vanished from the global market in just a few years, enough to disrupt prices, availability, and consumer habits on a global scale. This decline has nothing to do with people suddenly using more olive oil. The root cause lies in the escalating climate crisis across the Mediterranean region, which supplies over 60% of the world's olive oil. Extended droughts, heat waves that exceed what olive trees can tolerate, and heavy rains arriving at the worst possible moments have placed groves under extreme stress. The result is fewer olives, smaller fruit, and, most critically, a significant reduction in oil content. Under these conditions, extra virgin olive oil is always the first product to disappear. Producing it requires nearly flawless olives, and those conditions are becoming increasingly rare in an unstable climate. The familiar pattern follows quickly. Trusted brands quietly vanish. Bottle sizes shrink. Prices climb rapidly, and quality becomes inconsistent from one purchase to the next. Unlike seasonal crops that can rebound within a year, olive trees are perennial and need many years to recover once productivity drops. There is no fast way for the market to replace what's been lost. Substitute oils like avocado oil or grapeseed oil simply cannot fill the gap, neither in volume nor in culinary function. Because of this, the growing difficulty in finding affordable, consistent extra virgin olive oil isn't just a kitchen inconvenience. It's a clear warning that the long-standing stability of the global food supply chain is beginning to crack. In your area, which grocery item has risen the most in price or is most often missing from shelves lately? Take note and share it. Your experience helps paint the bigger picture. 13. Infant formula. Many people still clearly remember what unfolded in 2022 when parents across the United States were forced to visit store after store, hoping to find even a single container of infant formula. Grocery aisles stood empty. Purchase limits of 2 cans per customer were posted everywhere. In some locations, display cases were locked. Not to stop theft, but because there was simply nothing left inside. This was not a crisis unfolding in a struggling nation. It happened in the United States, and it exposed just how vulnerable the infant formula supply becomes when even a small part of the system fails. Formula is one of the most delicate and tightly controlled segments of the entire food supply chain. Babies cannot wait, substitute, or adapt the way adults can. There are no flexible alternatives when formula is unavailable. Because production is so concentrated, even a single factory shutdown, a product recall, or a technical malfunction can cause supplies to collapse almost overnight. That is the trade-off of an industry built on extremely strict safety standards, limited manufacturing sites, and very few backup options. What makes this especially concerning is that the underlying conditions behind the previous shortage haven't gone away. Global supply chains remain fragile, production costs stay elevated, and the industry still operates with minimal reserve inventory. When demand rises even slightly, or when production is interrupted for a short period, shortages can spread with alarming speed. And recent history has already shown that this risk is very real. Infant formula is not a convenience item, and it isn't something families can postpone buying. It represents a hard truth about the modern food system. Some of the most critical products people depend on every day are also among the easiest to lose when stability breaks down. 12. Cocoa and chocolate. A chocolate bar feels like a simple, everyday treat, but behind it sits one of the clearest examples of stress within the global food system. What looks ordinary on the surface actually reveals deep cracks in international supply chains. More than 70% of the world's cocoa supply comes from West Africa, with Côte d'Ivoire and Ghana serving as the backbone of global production. Recently, this region experienced one of the poorest harvests in decades. Output in these two key countries fell by an estimated 20 to 30%, driven by prolonged heat, rainfall arriving at the wrong times, and the spread of crop diseases that thrive under unstable climate conditions. The market reacted quickly. In 2024, cocoa prices climbed to historic highs, at times surpassing $10,000 per metric ton. This wasn't a temporary price spike. It was a structural supply shock, signaling a deeper and more persistent imbalance between supply and demand. The timing makes the situation even more fragile. The end of the year is traditionally the period of highest cocoa consumption, driven by baking, holiday desserts, gifts, and seasonal chocolate tied to Christmas and New Year celebrations. When demand reaches its annual peak, just as supply weakens, the industry has little choice but to scale back. Products with higher cocoa content are usually the first to disappear. Baking cocoa and dark chocolate become harder to find because they rely less on fillers and blending. Shoppers begin to notice familiar changes: smaller bars, reformulated recipes, and prices rising faster than overall inflation. Cocoa trees are perennial crops that require several years to recover after a poor harvest. Because of that, this shortage cannot be fixed in a single season. And when chocolate, once a small, comforting habit, starts to feel scarce or expensive, it's a clear signal that everyday pleasures are quietly being pushed into the category of luxury. Have you noticed any of the items on this list becoming harder to find compared to last year? Share your experience in the comments. I'd really like to hear what you're seeing where you live. 11. Fresh berries. Fresh berries are more than just another category of fruit. For older adults, they're one of the few foods that offer multiple practical health benefits while still being easy to eat, prepare, and digest. After the age of 50, subtle changes begin to show up in the body. Joints may feel stiffer, blood vessels lose some flexibility, memory isn't quite as sharp, and digestion often slows down. Strawberries, blueberries, and raspberries are naturally rich in antioxidants, which help the body manage inflammation and cellular stress. Blueberries in particular are frequently associated with brain support, helping sustain focus and easing the mild forgetfulness that many people notice as they get older. Another key advantage of berries is how gentle they are on digestion. They provide a good amount of fiber without feeling heavy or irritating, unlike some raw vegetables or overly sweet fruits that can cause discomfort. This makes them especially helpful for maintaining regular digestion and reducing constipation, which is a very common concern among older adults. Berries also offer clear emotional and mental benefits. Their bright colors, balanced sweet tart flavor, and the reassurance of eating something genuinely healthy can lift mood and provide comfort, especially during times when grocery prices are rising and familiar foods are becoming harder to find. The good news is that large portions aren't necessary. Just a small handful each day is enough to make a difference. They're best enjoyed after a main meal, paired with Greek yogurt, mixed into soft oatmeal, or blended into a light smoothie without added sugar. When fresh berries aren't available, frozen options work extremely well, retaining most of their nutritional value while being easy to store and use. Used thoughtfully, berries become one of the simplest yet most effective foods for supporting physical health, mental clarity, and a sense of everyday stability for older adults. 10. Canned soups and bone broth. For adults over 50, canned soups and bone broth are more than quick meals. They're often the first choice on days when energy is low, the throat feels irritated, or standing in the kitchen for long periods simply isn't realistic. These foods are closely tied to rest, recovery, and ease of digestion. Because of that role, demand for soups and broths tends to rise early whenever cold weather sets in. Illnesses become more common, or household budgets start feeling tighter. The issue isn't that soup disappears altogether, it's that the healthiest options become harder to find. As demand increases, manufacturers focus on high-volume, mass-market products, which means low-sodium, organic, and preservative-free varieties are usually the first to be reduced or discontinued. Bone broth is under similar strain. Its higher ingredient costs and longer preparation process make it more vulnerable when producers need to simplify or cut back. Trusted brands and well-made options often vanish quietly while lower-quality alternatives remain on the shelf. At first glance, stores may still appear well-stocked. But for older adults who rely on gentle, health-conscious choices, the selection is shrinking. And when foods designed to support the body during periods of weakness or recovery become difficult to access, it's a strong signal that health-related stress has reached deep into the food supply itself. Which item on this list do you think will face the greatest pressure by the end of the year? Share the number you're watching most closely below. 9. Aromatic and specialty rice. In many households, rice sits at the center of daily meals. Varieties like jasmine, basmati, and short-grain rice aren't chosen for luxury. They're selected because they're familiar, gentle on digestion, and easy to cook. Yet these very types of rice are also among the most vulnerable, largely because they rely so heavily on international trade. Aromatic and specialty rice production is concentrated in just a small number of countries. When climate conditions turn unpredictable, transportation costs increase, or exporting nations decide to protect their own food supplies first, global availability tightens almost immediately. Most shoppers won't encounter completely empty rice shelves. Instead, the change is more subtle. Trusted varieties become harder to find, while prices for the same familiar bags rise much faster than expected. Over time, selection narrows without much warning. The pattern is consistent. Higher quality and lower volume rice disappears before basic staple varieties. When supply is under pressure, the market protects what's easiest to replace, while aromatic and specialty rice, harder to source and slower to rotate, are reduced first. For older adults, this shift isn't only about cost. It's the quiet discomfort of seeing everyday meals lose their sense of familiarity and routine. And when something as fundamental as rice begins to change without explanation, it's a strong indication that the stress on the food supply chain runs far deeper than what's visible on the store shelf. 8. Citrus fruits. As colder weather sets in, citrus fruits like oranges, lemons, and grapefruits naturally become part of many people's routines. They aren't viewed as indulgences, but as dependable winter staples that offer comfort and a sense of protection. Ironically, demand for citrus peaks at the exact same time the supply is facing growing challenges. In the United States, Florida's citrus industry has taken repeated hits from hurricanes and extreme weather events. These disruptions have weakened groves and caused long-lasting drops in production. Citrus trees don't recover quickly. Once damaged, they can take many years to return to full productivity. At the same time, major European producers are struggling as well. Countries such as Spain and Italy have seen reduced yields due to intense heat waves and rainfall arriving at the wrong points in the growing season. When multiple key regions experience problems at once, global supply tightens almost immediately. Winter is also the season of highest citrus consumption, not just for fresh fruit, but for juice and processed products as well. Most shoppers won't encounter completely empty shelves. Instead, the change shows up in subtler ways. Fewer options to choose from, uneven quality, and prices that are noticeably higher than in previous years. When foods closely associated with winter health and immunity become harder to find or afford, it's a clear signal that pressure is building in the supply chain, right when people rely on stability the most. If you're over 50 and want to better understand what's happening behind supermarket shelves, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss the next breakdown. 7. Wild-caught seafood. For years, foods like salmon, shrimp, and crab were reliable choices for balanced, heart-healthy meals, especially among older adults. Lately, however, seafood counters tell a different story. Selections are shrinking, prices are climbing quickly, and many familiar options are no longer available. The primary driver isn't demand, but stricter fishing limits. As ocean temperatures rise, marine ecosystems are under stress. Warmer waters interfere with fish reproduction, lower survival rates among young fish, and reduce overall population stability. In response, regulators have been forced to lower fishing quotas to protect remaining wild stocks. Once those limits are tightened, supply drops almost instantly. Wild-caught seafood is always affected first. While seafood may still appear available, what remains is often farm-raised, smaller in size, or sourced from unfamiliar regions. The variety and consistency people once relied on quietly fades away. For older adults, this change goes beyond higher prices. It's the slow disappearance of trusted quality and familiar flavors. And when seafood, once considered an accessible, nutritious staple, becomes harder to find, it signals that environmental strain has reached directly into everyday meals. 6. Plant-based milk. For many older adults, plant-based milks like oat milk and almond milk have become everyday staples. They're often chosen by people who have trouble digesting lactose or who simply prefer a lighter, easier to tolerate option. Lately, though, these shelves have started to feel less dependable. Familiar brands show up less consistently, product selections have narrowed, and prices have climbed at a noticeable pace. The weakness in plant-based milk supply comes from its reliance on two vulnerable systems at once: agriculture and specialized manufacturing. Almond production is highly sensitive to drought conditions. Oats are affected by shifting weather patterns and rising input costs. Even after crops are harvested, the raw ingredients still need to pass through dedicated processing facilities. If any one of these steps is disrupted, finished products fail to reach stores, despite strong and steady demand. When supply tightens, organic and specialty options are usually the first to be reduced or removed altogether. Shoppers may still find plant-based milk available, but not the specific varieties they rely on or feel comfortable with. For older adults, this shift is a reminder that alternatives once viewed as flexible and secure are becoming increasingly fragile under the strain of a complex and tightly connected production system. Which item on this list do you think will face the greatest pressure by the end of the year? Share the number you're watching most closely below. 5. Alternative flours. For many older adults, flours made from almonds, oats, or coconuts are no longer niche products. They're practical staples for people managing gluten sensitivity, blood sugar levels, or digestive comfort. Ironically, these healthier options are now facing growing pressure from both rising demand and limited supply. Interest in better eating habits has accelerated quickly, but production of alternative flours cannot scale the way traditional wheat flour does. Almonds grow in a small number of regions and are highly vulnerable to drought. Coconut production is easily disrupted by extreme weather and shipping delays. Oats face a different challenge altogether, competing not only for food use but also for plant-based milk manufacturing and animal feed. When demand increases faster than supply can adjust, the effects show up in familiar ways. Package sizes shrink, prices climb, and trusted brands quietly disappear from shelves. While shoppers may not encounter empty aisles, they do feel the change. Maintaining a healthier diet becomes more costly and less convenient than it once was. And when simple, better-for-you ingredients start slipping out of reach, it's a clear sign that the food supply system is struggling to keep pace with real-world health needs. 4. Certain popular cuts of meat. Plenty on display, but not the pieces people rely on. At first glance, supermarket meat counters still appear well-stocked. The issue isn't an overall lack of meat. It's the quiet disappearance of the most familiar and useful cuts. Ribeye, sirloin, pork shoulder, and chicken wings are becoming harder to find. These are the cuts people know how to cook, the ones tied to long-standing family meals and simple, dependable recipes. The shift doesn't happen all at once. Instead, it shows up gradually. Smaller package sizes, fewer options to choose from, and prices that rise faster than nearly everything else in the store. What's missing isn't volume, it's quality and familiarity. Rising costs across slaughtering, labor, and transportation have pushed suppliers to make careful decisions about where their products go. Large buyers, such as restaurants and wholesalers, are often prioritized through long-term contracts. As a result, the most desirable cuts, those that sell easily and generate higher margins, are pulled from retail shelves first. For older adults, this goes far beyond higher prices. It disrupts everyday cooking routines. A tender cut that works for a quick pan sear, a well-marbled piece ideal for slow braising, or chicken wings meant for a relaxed weekend meal suddenly become difficult to find. Meat is still available, but not the kind people actually plan their meals around. When the most familiar cuts disappear before anything else, it's a clear indication that supply chain pressure has reached all the way to the family dinner table. Subscribe to the channel if you'd rather understand these shifts early, instead of being caught off guard once everything has already changed. 3. Alternative cooking oils. When extra virgin olive oil becomes hard to find and prices climb sharply, many households naturally turn to alternatives like avocado oil or grapeseed oil. At first, this transition seems manageable and barely noticeable. But when large numbers of people make the same switch at the same time, stress quickly builds around these substitute oils. The core problem is what economists call demand compression. Avocado oil and grapeseed oil are produced in far smaller volumes and aren't designed to absorb sudden surges in popularity. Avocado harvests depend heavily on seasonal timing and reliable water supplies. Grapeseed oil, on the other hand, is closely tied to grape production within the wine industry, meaning its availability can't be easily increased on demand. As demand accelerates while supply remains limited, the market responds quickly and predictably. Bottles shrink in size, well-known brands become harder to find, and prices rise within a short period of time. For older adults, the impact goes beyond the cost at checkout. It creates a subtle sense of disruption in a once familiar kitchen routine. Cooking oil may still be available, but it's no longer the type they prefer, or it comes at a significantly higher price for the same everyday use. When even the backup options begin to fluctuate, it's a clear signal that pressure from one strained product has started to ripple across the entire food system. 2. Baking ingredients. The final months of the year are when home kitchens are at their busiest. Not because of extravagance, but because people come together. Baking a familiar recipe, smelling vanilla in the air, and using cocoa and sugar aren't just culinary steps. They're traditions tied to family, comfort, and shared memories. Ironically, these very holiday essentials are often the first to become scarce when the system tightens. Sugar itself isn't truly rare, but during peak seasons, much of the supply is redirected toward beverage production and large-scale food manufacturing. Retail shelves feel the impact through higher prices, smaller packages, and fewer choices for home bakers. Baking cocoa is under even greater pressure. Climate-related disruptions have already made global cocoa supply unstable, and when availability tightens, manufacturers tend to prioritize high-volume commercial products. The cocoa intended for home baking is often the first to run short. The most vulnerable ingredient of all is natural vanilla extract. Vanilla comes from a small number of growing regions, requires years to produce, and carries significant risk. A single weather event or shipping delay during the holiday season can be enough to clear real vanilla from store shelves, leaving only diluted or artificial substitutes behind. When ingredients so closely tied to emotion, tradition, and family memories become difficult to find, at the very moment people rely on them most, it stops being just a cooking issue. It becomes a clear sign that the supply chain is strained at its most sensitive time of year, the holidays. Is there an item on this list that's been part of your life for decades? Share one short memory below. 1. Frozen vegetables and fruits. As the year winds down and fresh produce becomes harder to predict, frozen fruits and vegetables stand out as one of the most reliable options available. Not because they're untouched by disruption, but because they're built to handle it better than most foods. When extreme weather damages crops, harvest labor falls short, or transportation problems delay deliveries, fresh produce often disappears first. Frozen products, however, quietly step in to bridge the gap. Their strength lies in control. Fruits and vegetables are processed and frozen at peak ripeness, right near the source, locking in quality long before supply chains are tested. Because they don't depend on perfect timing or seasonal availability, frozen foods give retailers far more flexibility during periods of strain. Compared to premium meats, seafood, or fresh fruit, this category holds up better when pressure builds. For older adults, frozen produce offers genuine stability. It's easy to store, simple to portion, reduces food waste, and works well when energy, mobility, or shopping frequency is limited. Nutritionally, it holds its ground too. Research consistently shows that frozen fruits and vegetables retain most of their vitamins and minerals. Low risk doesn't mean risk-free. As shortages appear elsewhere, demand naturally shifts toward frozen options as well. Still, compared to everything else on this list, frozen fruits and vegetables remain the strongest anchor for households that prepare realistically instead of reacting in panic. What you've just seen isn't a warning to overbuy or stockpile excessively. It's a clear snapshot of which foods are under the most strain in today's food system. As climate instability grows, labor shortages continue, and supply chains tighten, scarcity doesn't arrive all at once. It shows up gradually, category by category, and it almost always affects the most familiar items first. You don't need to buy everything. What matters is understanding which foods carry higher risk, which ones remain relatively dependable, and taking small, practical steps that fit your household and lifestyle. For those over 50 especially, consistency in daily meals often matters more than sheer quantity. If this video helped you better understand what's happening behind supermarket shelves, consider sharing it so others have time to prepare as well. Acting early is always easier than reacting later, especially now when these changes are no longer theoretical but unfolding day by day.